Hello, and welcome to another Debating Europe live panel where experts discuss comments that you have sent us in on our website, debatingeurope.eu. My name is Joe Littbarski, and I'm the editor of Debating Europe. And today we're going to be talking about the future of education and the role universities might play in promoting a culture of lifelong learning. We have 30 minutes for discussion, and we will be responding to 3 questions posed by readers on our website. The first being a kind of general question. It's the topic of the debate, what the panelists think about the concept of lifelong learning and what role universities might play. Second, a question about fairness. Who will pay? And third, a question about flexibility. Do we need a more flexible approach to accreditation, micro-credentials, and so on? We'll get into each of these in turn. So we're going to go lifelong learning, fairness, flexibility. But let's start by introducing our panel. So joining me today are Alessandro Fusacchia, an Italian member of parliament and Friends of Europe European Young Leader. Alessandro, hi.
Hello, thanks a lot. Hello.
We also have Michael Gabel, who is a director of higher education policy at the European University Association. Michael.
Hello. Hi, Joe. Nice to be with you.
Good to have you here. Thank you. We're joined by Liz Shutt, who's director of policy at University of Lincoln and Greater Lincolnshire Local Enterprise Partnership. Hi, Liz.
Hello, nice to be here.
And last but not least, we've also got Brikena Shomaki, who's director at Lifelong Learning Platform LLP. Brikena, hello.
Hello to everyone, and happy to join.
Thank you all for being with us. So let's start then with the first question, just to introduce this debate, this panel. So traditionally, education has been the stage in our lives before work. However, these days, it's not uncommon for a person not just to change jobs, but even to change careers entirely over the course of their lives. Likewise, technology is developing at such a blistering pace that skills constantly need updating and refreshing. So do we need to rethink our approach to education? What would anywhere, anytime education look like in practice? These are some ideas that are explored in Friends of Europe's report on the green digital transition called Connected Europe, which you can read on our website, friendsofeurope.org. Debating Europe is, of course, a project of Friends of Europe. But for today's panel, let's start with a comment from one of our readers, Junken, who argues we need to promote a lifelong learning approach with people constantly upskilling throughout their careers to keep up with new technology. Is he right? And what role could universities play in a lifelong learning approach? Liz, let's start with you. What would you say to Junken's comment?
Yeah, so I mean, I agree that there is a role for bite-sized learning and opportunities for people to return and retrain at university throughout their career. And actually, I think it's often misunderstood. A lot of universities are offering some of these types of courses already. But I also think we need to think about what we're instilling in students in their first degrees and in their research degrees, because there's something about the impact of technological change and how we adapt to these types of careers that is actually mean we need to kind of instill these things like critical and adaptive thinking and learning, an iterative approach to kind of experiencing your career and developing as you go through the workforce. And actually these skills are kind of very much integral to the university experience and especially the research endeavour. And so whilst I think it's really important that universities are able to offer those opportunities to retrain throughout careers, I think we also need to think about that kind of base experience that we already offer, and perhaps especially how we can make sure students are having more exposure to the research side within universities, as well as the learning skills side, because actually it's that kind of exploration that will probably be a really critical skill in the 21st century.
Michael, maybe I can bring you in. Is that would you sort of agree with Liz and say that's a similar kind of attitude at universities across Europe?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Junken and also with Liz. And it's actually something that we have been promoted for the past 20 years. One could ask, why have we not been more successful? And I think one of the answers is that overall, Europe is probably not doing too well on lifelong learning. So if you looked at the European benchmark that we had set for the last decade, of 15%, we haven't really reached that. That said, I think Liz is right. Universities do already quite a lot on lifelong learning. It's not overly visible, yeah. And how could we make it more visible? And another point that may come to play is that a university experience, a study, prepares you already for lifelong learning as you're trained to think critically, to inquire autonomously, and. But I agree there should be more done to promote and also to show what lifelong learning opportunities are there, to have them more used.
Okay, I think that's very interesting, and we'll get into this question of why have we not been more successful. This is lifelong learning is a kind of buzzword that has a long history. Lots of people we've been talking about it for a long time, certainly in European policy circles. So why haven't we been more successful? I think that is an interesting question. Brikena, let me bring you in here, because clearly you're working for a lifelong learning platform. This is something that you're doing. What's your kind of response to what you've heard?
First, I want to actually add on the fact that maybe it's provocative to what was said in the statement, but there is this misunderstanding, general misunderstanding, that lifelong learning is what we do after graduation, which confuses a lot the concept of lifelong learning with adult education or continuous education and further education. In different languages, in different member states, we have different definitions. It's a global issue. It's an issue that UNESCO looks at, and we look at as well, that lifelong learning it's much more than that. And for us, the way we define lifelong learning, it's a holistic approach to education that starts with the curiosity and the competence learning to learn from early ages, and it continues throughout life. So for me, this is important to clarify. And then in the comment, it refers to upskilling and to career. Well, lifelong learning or education, further education, is not just about the career. In the digital and the green transitions, we need much more than that, because it's not only about building or reskilling yourself, but it's also being able to continue to participate in the society. For instance, even digital participation, digital democracy are new concepts. That means that citizens have to acquire new skills to be able to continue participate in the social life, not only in the labor market. So I think this is also an important aspect. And obviously the universities, this is nothing new for them. They have been doing this. It has been part of their mission. Now, have they been successful? Well, I think the diversity of the learners has made their work much harder. And there is a need to rethink and modernize teaching and learning for this new group of learners that are not anymore the usual suspects, young people that finish their schools and go to university. We have totally different learners now that we need to accommodate the teaching and learning to their needs as well.
I think that's a really important point, and it's I think been really driven home by the pandemic, particularly this idea that unless you have digital skills, it excludes you to an extent from society. You need it increasingly to participate. So that's, I think, a very interesting point. Alessandra, let me bring you in here. What's your own kind of perspective on what you've heard so far?
I fully agree with what has been said, and I think I appreciate what Brikena was saying in terms of clarifying what lifelong learning is, first of all, and secondly, also the fact that we are basically talking about a new right that we have to entitle to people, to each individual on earth, I would say. There is a difference, because I think one point when you bring in universities is that schools and universities are at the mission to, first of all, form you as a citizen, not as a worker. When we discuss about lifelong learning, but probably in the stricter definition, which is the most commonly accepted out there. So we need this exercise in clarifying that we're not just discussing about adult learning or continuous learning, etc. But there is an argument that, of course, it must be a sort of learning which is much more actionable to some extent, because you are reskilling for a new job. You're reskilling to be able to stay into the society. But the point that Brikena was making about the fact that digital or the sustainable transition, the green transition, requires you to be able to continue to participate into the society is key. Now, the question about universities is basically not if, as Liz and Michael were saying, it's not a question whether universities can have anything to do with this. They're already doing a lot of stuff. The question is under which conditions they can be become more visible, more active, and I think that probably is part of the two questions that you're going to introduce about the flexibility first and foremost, because of course university was set up in order, now I say it very bluntly, but for the single person to stay in person for many days and for many years in the same place. I mean, if you want to outreach everybody into society, and university becoming part of at the core of this exercise, you need to reinvent the way universities are organized, basically.
And do you think we need to? This is sort of the question. So I think there's a tension here, which everyone has identified very early on, and we talked about it a little bit before we started recording, which is, are we talking about universities or are we talking about lifelong learning? And what is the role of higher education institutions in promoting lifelong learning? Do they have a role? Is it more in critical skills and so on? So do you think we need, Alessandro, I'll stay with you, to kind of, do we need to reinvent the role of universities, or actually universities, they're doing a lot already? It's more about kind of working in other areas of with workplaces, with kind of governments and so on.
To be very frank, Joe, I think that there is a point here that the universities are everybody and everything else are going through a major transformation, because everything is accelerating so fast with the speed of technology, etc. But there is 2 points I want to make. The first one is that it's very difficult to talk about universities. Universities in Italy are very different from universities in the UK, just to give an example. So, and they are under different legislations, which and under different cultural models, I would say. So, it's very, for instance, I'm promoting with many other colleagues a piece of legislation to make sure that you can follow 2 different courses at the same time, which is forbidden at the moment in Italy since 1933, 90 years. So, this is something completely odd if I talk to colleagues from other countries, And then there is another point, which is the point I want to make. The major transformation we have to go is that we need to accept that we need augmented universities. So after 2 years of pandemics, everybody is very, terrified by the idea that there is an alternative. Either you stay there physically in the university with the assets and values of the presence of being in touch with and creating relations with other people's professors and colleagues, etc., or you stay at home away doing these remote connections and remote learning. We need to overcome this fake polarization. And there is a lot to be discussed there on that point, and to be organized and to be settled and to be decided.
Okay, let's bring Michal in. You wanted to come in on this, Michal.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Alexandro said. It's between obviously national culture, different national regulations as well, but also between different universities. I would argue, nevertheless, that if you look at it, and the landscape is very diverse, it will be hard to find a university which does not contribute in one or the other way to lifelong learning. In the widest possible dimension, we can think it, starting from children universities up to leisure learning and continued professional development and all these issues. And I think Alexandro is right. We have seen change happening. I think it went also along with, not only for lifelong learners, but with a general emphasis on transformation of learning and teaching. It's not only about the lifelong learners. And that has been going on for some time. And I think the present crisis, which is of course deplorable, that's terrible, but it gives really an opportunity for broader reflection and exploration of some of the opportunities there. So we see that the formats are changing. Or let's put it like this, some of the formats that have been in use at institutions, like short courses, which are now framed as micro-credentials, for example, they are getting more visibility now. They're all digitally. We did already in 2013 a study where we could show that every university had some kind of digital enhanced learning already at the time. 30% or more than 30% had online courses, but they were not necessarily the flagship initiatives of the institution. They happened somewhere at the institution. And I think we are much more focused on this now, also due to increased lifelong learning needs.
Liz, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you. I think I just wanted to sort of pick up on this point that lifelong learning is about learning to learn from an early age. I really like that. And I think that that's especially important when we understand that the impact of technological change is likely to devalue knowledge acquisition, because those are many of the things that you can regurgitate from knowledge acquisition are the very things that can be automated. And I think it places a higher value on things like curiosity, originality, and creativity. And leading on from that, I think that there is a huge amount of time change that universities could go through to prepare their students for this world, both whilst they're at university for a first degree or a first university experience, and also engaging with lifelong learning. For example, I think that interdisciplinarity is really important, not just in our research endeavours, but in our teaching endeavours, to prepare students to go into a world where there's increasing blurriness between sectors, for example. And then in terms of lifelong learning, I think we need to think about partnership more, and I think that universities absolutely have a role to play with that, but in partnership with in the UK further education colleges, and for example at University of Lincoln we have something called an Institute of Technology across Greater Lincolnshire with partner colleges, which is looking to instill the kind of knowledge we have as a university on digitalization within that kind of further education curriculum. So there's much that can be done in this space, and I think that the more that we understand about the challenges of the 21st century, the more that we can be quite creative about the university model and beyond.
Yeah, Liz, I think that's a really important point. And actually listening to all of you and what you've all sort of said, it strikes me that to an extent we're sort of playing catch up a little bit with technology, that a lot of these changes are being driven by events. We've all gone through the pandemic over the past couple of years. Clearly we're still in it. We're all doing this online. We wouldn't have, with these sort of debates, we would have done them in person 2 years ago, and now we're kind of all online. So we're adapting, and that gives opportunities, but it also exposes maybe some of the kind of the limitations in our approaches. And I want to put a question to you. I'm going to move on to this question of fairness, because I think this is maybe at the heart of it. If we don't adapt, there's a concern, I think, from some of our readers that the results will be unfair on people. So I said we'd move on to fairness, and this comes from H Joe. I think it's a username rather than their real name, I'm not sure. H Joe sent us a comment arguing that lifelong learning is great for employers because their staff will learn for free on the internet in their own time. But is this fair? How can people take a lifelong learning approach when they have to juggle a full-time job, family, and other commitments at the same time? And we're all aware of this during the pandemic. So there's been so much bleed over of different aspects of our life, and kind of education and work. There's a risk that this happens as well if it's not done in a thoughtful approach. So maybe Brikena, I can bring you in. What would you say to kind of this question of fairness, and how we can ensure that, because it is a lot of investment in terms of educating and upskilling people, and that this question of who pays, who's supported, and how much support is given. What would you say to this?
Well, I absolutely find that unfair, obviously. I mean, education systems are known in many circumstances to not necessarily be very inclusive, especially, I mean, I would be probably a bit provocative here, but higher education, in particular universities, have always been having this image of being elitist and maybe not necessarily giving access to all different groups of the society to further educate. And there are many learners that have adverse experience with higher education. And these are certainly people that in order to motivate them to go back to university, it's very hard. And I think it's also fair to say that it shouldn't be on the shoulders of universities alone to solve this skills gap. There is many and plenty of other learning opportunities out there that are adapted to different age groups and to different learners group that can also be adaptive, but we have to fund them, we have to invest in them, and we have to finance also those that do not have access to those opportunities for several reasons and social and economic conditions that they might have. So I think it's very important, and obviously funding arrangements have a major impact on inclusiveness of our education and training systems and in their flexibility. So without funding, this is not possible. Now there is this European initiative on the individual learning accounts, which is a new funding mechanism that goes a bit in the direction of what Alessandro said and extending the right to education, the right to lifelong learning, the learning entitlements. And I think it's a new opportunity for people to be able to afford new learnings and training opportunities that otherwise their companies will not be able to. Because let's face it, in Europe, we have a majority of SMEs who do not have the funding and the instruments to provide in-house training or in general to afford their employees to be absent for further training. So this has to be complemented with other funding opportunities financed by public or private actors.
These individual learning accounts that you mentioned are really very interesting. I think Scotland has used them. Singapore, I believe, uses something simple. So this is a set of amount of kind of credits or kind of funds put aside for an individual learner over the course of their lives that they can draw on for kind of skilling. This is correct. This is, and what a question I have whenever kind of individual learning accounts come up is always, what kind of amounts are we talking about here? Because education is expensive, and this comes back to this question of fairness. So it could be, 100-200 euros, something of that order, or I have seen people pushing for kind of, 40,000 euros, 10,000 euros over the course of your life, of your working life. When you talk about individual learning accounts, Brikena, what could you maybe go into that a little bit more? What do you have in mind?
Well, we have a few examples that you mentioned as well. France is now the let's say the piloting and more experienced country in Europe when it comes to the individual learning accounts. We are talking about smaller budgets, annual budgets of 500 to 5,000, depending. That of course comes from taxes you have paid through your employment. So again, one of the issues with the system as it is right now, wherever the system exists, is depending on your employment contributions. So unless you are or have been employed, you have no rights to further training and education. So this is for me a little bit of an issue here of inclusiveness. But we are talking about a system that is very complex. In Belgium, for example, you will have education pay. So you will get days off to be able to do further trainings for which the employer is compensated. So each country in the member states, they have different mechanisms, tax mechanisms to finance it, but there is no data as of to which amounts is worth, because it depends a lot on how the economic system is built in the country. But it has to be fair. It has to be fair for those that are probably not employed, that need much more support, financial support, and it has to be inclusive for everyone. So yeah, we have to find an amount that fits the needs, the diverse needs, let's say.
Interesting. Okay, Alessandro, you wanted to come in, and then Michal afterwards.
Yes, very briefly. The key question is what I was mentioning before, and I think it builds very much on what Brikena was saying now, which is it's an opportunity, but you need to treat this as a right, as a new right. If I see this in historical perspective, I mean, to be frank, 2 centuries ago or 1 century ago, schools were not for everybody. Not to mention 8 hours work day was for everybody. And then at some point we decided it was a priority. So now we need to readjust the system to make sure that you have these training opportunities, lifelong learning opportunities all the time. Now, the point is we are talking about the problems of SMEs, but there are plenty of people who are not working, not even in an SME. So the question is, if we want to give it as a right, as an opportunity to everybody, it needs to change completely the fact that from the legislator point of view, from the public sector point of view, from the point of view of those who pass legislation, you need to find the money and to find the new regulation to put this at the core of a new society you want to build. And let's stop discussing about this in terms of costs. It's an investment. Now, as every investment that we do, and particularly in education, at the very beginning, it has a cost. So here comes the public sector, the public, I would say. So here is the injection of money, of public money, of new regulation, but it's definitely an investment for the state, for the European Union, for the UK. I was forgetting that. And for the and of course for every single company, every single public administration, in the public administration, this is totally key, because otherwise we will building up administrations that will simply not keep the pace with the society. So we need to take officials in the public administrations, give them time to learn new things, to learn new methodologies, to learn how to have a relationship with the society, to upskill themselves, so in order to have the engine ruling throughout all the society.
Very well said. Michal.
Just to go back to the question, is it fair? I think what is in there is, of course, on the one hand side, on how the right of lifelong learning for citizens is spelled out and how that is also integrated into labor market rules. But the other aspect that comes in is a question of inclusiveness. And this goes, of course, not only for lifelong learners. And I think that's something that we may not have achieved as much progress as we wanted to, but I think at least we have much more awareness and much more thinking about these issues nowadays at universities. So if you look at also at the social realities of students nowadays, you will sometimes think, is that actually a working student, or is it an employee who is studying? Yeah. So it gets more fluid. I think that has already been said. Students' profiles are much more diverse. And I think that is an important issue to consider. And then what has been said also, that even while we have in some countries where education is paid by the public, or it's all over you, but it's basically paid by the public purse, most of it. But of course, for lifelong learners, it comes at a price. And this is also something that we may have to think about on how to do that better. That brings me to one point that was made in the question. It's not exactly free. So even if you have content for free online, I think we have to build awareness that is usually paid by European taxpayers' money. I mean, it's European universities who produce it, or other international universities, when we look at these big MOOC platforms, yeah. And we should, I don't say that to put a price tag on it, but just to build awareness that this is really a valuable resource and we should use it well.
This is wonderful. This is exactly the debate I hoped we would have. Liz, would you like to come in?
Thank you. I mean, I think as this discussion kind of links to what we were discussing previously about universities adapting, and I guess sort of building on this idea of blurriness in all aspects of the discussion we're having. I think really delivering lifelong learning is about a partnership between public administration, business, universities, and citizens, and that's the only way really to deliver it. So the question presumes it's all on the citizen, but actually to really make this work, we have to share this between us and with businesses to make courses that are possible for employees to come in out of the workforce, and that can have bite size, you can have a block release, you can have, if you're working with an employer, you can really understand what their business blockages are and how you can create content that their employees are able to engage with either in work or outside of work. But I think that we need a new relationship between all of these entities in society to make lifelong learning work.
Okay, I think, and I wanted to have this question of fairness first, because for exactly the reasons that you've just spelled out, Liz, very, very kind of eloquently, because the final part of, we've got about 5 minutes left, so we'll have to be brief. But the final part I wanted to talk about was actually how do we, if we want to, kind of increase the fluidity through kind of increasing flexibility, the kind of reforms that Alessandro was talking about. And perhaps we can start with you, Alessandro. It's the final question, and this was sent in from let me see who sent this. Magda sent this comment in. So Magda says, we need much more flexibility in higher education in Europe, including transferal of credits between institutions within countries, I suppose, and across borders. And this could be outside of the EU. It could be EU-UK, for example. An EU framework for micro-credentials and greater diversity of certified accrediting organizations. So Alessandro, what would you say?
Two comments. The first one is, of course, yes, definitely. And after 2 years of COVID and pandemics, we have found out that, of course, you don't need to move to another place, to another city, another university to do your Erasmus, just to give you an idea. So of course that matters, and I did it myself. It was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life, but you can multiply those chances, you can do some periods abroad, but at the same time you can stay in your university and follow structurally other courses in other universities, in other countries of Europe, where then you're credited for that participation. So this must be encouraged, because simply we are living in a different world, even compared to 10 or 5 years ago, when the schemes for European transferal of credits were invented. The second and final comment is the following. University is normally well known for research and teaching, but we always tend to forget the third part, which is the third mission, or how is it called in different countries, which basically is the projection of university into the society. Now, I think it's absolute, at least in Italy, is under evaluated, is underestimated the impact that it can have. And on the other way around, I think university must open much more, at least I speak about the country I know better, in terms of receiving inputs from outside, in bringing the society that is outside there into the university. Because if you're talking about lifelong learning, we need to remember that it means learning how to live. It's not just a question of learning disciplines or technology or the way we normally tend to think about universities. Is you need to teach life when you are at the university, and you need to do this, you need to bring society into the university when you're there.
Okay, Liz, you want to come in? We're gonna wrap up now. So these are kind of last comments. I'll bring in Liz, then Michal, and then give the last word to Brikena. Liz, if you'd like to come in.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to briefly mention, so my role is actually I'm working for the university and the regional economic development sort of agency. So I'm doing exactly that, working across the system, working across organisations to try and close that loop and make sure that that third mission is really central to what the university is doing. So I think that's a really interesting point. And then in terms of how this all links back to the lifelong learning question, I think we really need to think about mixed economy institutions. We do need more micro-credentials, but we also need to make sure that in focusing on accreditation, we don't lose those kind of wider elements that are often harder to explain within the university experience, that actually the very things that can't be automated in the 21st century. So I think it's having that mix and that blurriness and that kind of outside in is all part of what we're talking about here.
Michal.
Yeah, probably just to follow up on that. I think from a technical point of view, I mean, credit transfer, we have this already, and since quite a while, it doesn't work yet very well and everywhere and in all situations. So there's clearly something to be enhanced there. And then on the second point as well, I think micro-credentials, this is an example of something that the universities already do. Many universities already do. We just did a study where we found out that every second university offers them already online. Even, yeah. So it's nothing that you ask the university to do. You don't assess them you look on their research performance, but not on how they contribute to lifelong learning. So in a way, this is an underrated mission for the universities. And I think the last point was just like I completely agree with Alexander about what he said about universities and societies. Maybe we should. I would invite you. We have to talk about this. We just published our 2030 vision paper, Universities Without Walls, and which is all about this. So
excellent. We can put a link to that in the show notes, Michal. Brikena, last word to you.
Thank you. Well, actually, I would also agree with the last comment and that what Alessandro said as well. I think that was my main point that I wanted to bring to this debate as well, being from the Lifelong Learning Platform, which is a very diverse group of education and training providers that represent also NGOs that provide education as well. And I think it's very important that universities indeed link better to the community, to their local reality, to the regions, to the nation, and that they play a better role in reflecting the society needs and addressing society needs. They have a key role in that. So I would really promote that. And I think to close, maybe I think flexibility is key. We don't have to, there is no one education provider that need to fix these issues. There are many, and we can work together. And I fully agree with what Liz said about partnerships. And I will definitely see this role of universities somehow also being intermediaries of building these partnerships with different stakeholders and education and training providers, in order to improve access and flexibility to learning opportunities for all.
Wonderful. That is an excellent note to end on, I think. Thank you, everybody. Okay, look, we're out of time, so we're going to stop the debate here. Clearly, we could have gone on and on, but you can continue the debate at home by leaving comments on our website, www.debatingeurope.eu, where you will find this debate alongside many other European and global issues. Please like and subscribe on our social media channels, and a huge thank you to my panel for taking the time to respond to our reader questions, and also to you at home for watching. Thank you all, and goodbye.